By 1925, Pullman porters worked over 400 hours a month, and the food they ate came from whatever could fit in a tin pail. These were black men in starched white jackets, smiling through 14-hour runs, then quietly eating cold cornbread and cured pork by lantern light. Number 20 on this list was the meal porters fried in a coffee tin when the dining car ran dry. Number 13 was the cheap stew they passed down to their sons. And number 6 on this list became a Sunday plate in nearly every porter family from Chicago to New Orleans. Cheap is the wrong word for these meals. They were survival dressed up as supper, and the men who ate them carried a railroad on their backs. So hit subscribe and let's open the porter's pail, because here are 30 cheap Pullman porter meals our black ancestors ate to survive. Number 30, cold cornbread wrapped in wax paper. Every porter's run began with a square of yesterday's cornbread tucked against the lining of the tin pail. It was the cheapest food a black household in Chicago or Atlanta could send a working man out the door with, and it was the most reliable. Wives baked it in cast iron the night before, cut it into bricks, and wrapped each piece in wax paper so the crumbs stayed off the starched jacket. By 1928, a porter on the Panama Limited could go 16 hours between proper meals, and the cornbread was what kept him standing through the second shift. He ate it dry, leaning against the vestibule door, sometimes with a sliver of cured pork pressed inside like a pocket. Nothing about it was special. That was the whole point. Number 29, hoe cakes cooked on the vestibule stove. When the dining car shut for the night, porters slipped down to the coal stove that heated the vestibule and dropped a spoon of cornmeal batter onto the hot iron lid. Hoe cakes were field food brought north by their fathers from Mississippi and Alabama, and they cost almost nothing. A cup of meal, a pinch of soda, water from the porter's washroom tap. The smell carried into the sleeper berths, and white passengers would sometimes ask what was cooking. Porters always said nothing. By the time the train hit St. Louis, the hoe cakes were folded into a handkerchief and eaten standing up. They were the closest thing a working man had to home cooking between Chicago and New Orleans. Number 28, salt pork and day-old biscuits. Salt pork was the cheapest cured meat a black family could afford in the 1920s, and porters bought it in slabs from corner butchers on the south side of Chicago for under 10 cents a pound. Their wives sliced it thin, fried it crisp, and packed it between two halves of a hardened biscuit so the grease soaked in slowly over the next 40 hours. It was a sandwich built to survive a transcontinental run without spoiling. The biscuit had been baked Friday morning, sat on the counter through Saturday, and by Sunday, it was hard enough to crack on the table edge. That hardness was the trick. A fresh biscuit would have crumbled in the pail by the second division stop. Porters ate it, leaning over the polishing bench, careful not to drip on the linen aprons. The biscuit absorbed everything the pork gave off. By the time the porter reached El Paso, the biscuit had become the meal. It was salty, dense, and stretched 2 cents into a full stomach. Number 27, red beans reheated 3 times. New Orleans porters carried red beans the way Chicago porters carried cornbread. A pot cooked on Sunday with a smoked ham bone fed a family Monday, then traveled with the porter Tuesday in a small enamel cup wedged inside the tin pail. Red beans cost about 8 cents a pound at the corner grocery in 1932, and a single pound fed a household of 6 on Monday and the porter for 2 more days. The beans were reheated on the stove in the porter's quarters, and the flavor deepened every time the cup hit the heat. By the second reheat, the pork bone had given up everything it had. By the third, the beans were almost a paste, eaten with a spoon over a folded napkin, Porters from Louisiana said the third reheat was the best one. The first two were just rehearsal. Number 26, sardines and soda crackers. A tin of sardines cost about 5 cents in 1930, and a sleeve of soda crackers cost 3. For under a dime, a Pullman porter could feed himself between Memphis and Cincinnati without setting foot in the white dining car. The tin opened with a key that doubled as a souvenir, and the oil from the fish soaked the crackers into something almost soft. Porters ate it sitting on the stairs of the baggage car, knees together, careful not to stain the trouser crease. It was an immigrant's meal, turned black working man's meal, turned railroad meal. It traveled well, never spoiled, and asked nothing of the man eating it. The empty tin went into the pail's bottom pocket on the return trip, useful for nails, buttons, or the small change a porter set aside for his daughter's school shoes once the run was done. Number 25, sweet potato pie in a mason jar. This is the meal that explains who Pullman porters actually were. By 1925, the Pullman Palace Car Company was the single largest employer of black men in the United States, and the men they hired came almost entirely from Southern households where sweet potatoes were the cheapest sweet food a mother could put on a table. A nickel of potatoes, a spoon of lard, a pinch of brown sugar, a dust of nutmeg if the cupboard had any. The pie came out of the oven on a Saturday night, was cooled overnight, and on Sunday morning his wife scooped a thick slice into a clean mason jar and screwed the lid down tight. That jar rolled in the bottom of the tin pail across 2,000 miles. It was the part nobody notices about the porter's life. The country saw a black man in a starched white jacket smiling at strangers for 14 hours straight, lifting trunks, shining shoes, hauling slop buckets, taking insults that came with a tip. What the country did not see was the jar at the bottom of the pail. The porter would eat the pie cold, sitting on a wooden crate in the porter's room behind the coal car, the spoon scraping the glass. It was sweet, dense, and it carried his wife's hands in it. Pullman paid him $67.50 a month in 1926 and expected him to buy his own uniform, his own polish, his own meals. The jar of pie was the part of the run that nobody paid for and the part that kept him from breaking. When A. Philip Randolph started organizing the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters that year, he understood that the fight was never just about wages. It was about whose dignity rode in the bottom of the pail. Number 24, chitlins cleaned the night before a run. Chitlins were the cheapest pork a black household could buy in 1929, sold for almost nothing because white grocers considered them scrap. Porters' wives cleaned them at the kitchen sink the night before a run, boiling them with onion and red pepper until the smell drove the children out onto the back porch. The cooked chitlins were then packed cold in a small jar and wedged beside the cornbread in the tin pail. Porters ate them at the end of the second shift when the dining car was shut and the sleeper berths were quiet. A man from Mobile said his mother used to cook them with vinegar to cut the funk, and that was the version he carried north with him to Chicago. The meal was old country food riding on a brand new luxury train. The contradiction never bothered the men who ate it. Number 23, smoked sausage and cold grits. Smoked sausage was the porter's protein when payday was still 6 days away. Black butchers in St. Louis and Memphis sold links for around 12 cents a piece in the early 1930s, and a porter's wife would pan-fry 2 of them on Saturday night, let them cool, and slide them into the tin pail beside a small enamel cup of stiff grits. The grits set up overnight in the icebox and traveled like a brick, eaten cold with the spoon while the train climbed the grade out of Birmingham. By the time the porter reached the second leg of his run, The sausage had bled its grease into the grits, and the meal was warm in the mouth, even though it was cold in the cup. It was poor food made smart. 3 working hours of food for the price of a streetcar fare. Number 22, hard-boiled eggs and a brown paper twist. Eggs were the cheapest portable protein a black household could send a working man out the door with, and porters carried them by the half dozen, twisted into a square of brown grocer's paper. By 1931, a dozen eggs at a Southside market ran around 28 cents, just over 2 pennies an egg. The shells stayed on through the run and were peeled at the moment of eating, the salt sprinkled from a tiny twist of paper inside the bigger twist. Porters ate them on the platform at division stops, slightly apart from the white travelers, shells dropped into the cinder bed beside the rails. It was fuel for the next 4 hours and nothing more. Number 21, fatback and onion sandwich. Fatback was the cheapest cut of black butcher in the South, sold by weight in the 1920s, and it traveled like leather. Porters' wives fried it slow until the strips curled into amber ribbons, then layered them with raw onion between 2 slices of bakery bread, bought day old for half price. The sandwich was wrapped in a single sheet of newsprint and pressed under a tin lid to flatten the bread into the meat. By the time the porter sat down on the steps of the baggage car to eat it, the onion had bitten into the fat, and the whole thing tasted like Sunday morning at a kitchen table in Tuskegee. It was a meal his father had eaten, his grandfather too. The train just carried it further than it had ever gone before. Number 20, skillet cornbread, fried in a coffee tin. This is the meal porters fried in a coffee tin when the dining car ran dry. By 1933, the Depression had cut Pullman's dining stocks thin, and on the long southern runs, the chefs sometimes ran out of food for the help by the second night. Porters who knew their way around the coal stove would empty a battered Maxwell House tin, oil the inside with a smear of bacon grease pulled from the morning rags, and drop a handful of cornmeal batter mixed with water from the washroom. The tin sat on the iron lid until the batter set into a thick, ragged cake. Porters cut it with a pocket knife and shared it between 2 men standing in the vestibule, the wind from the open Dutch door cooling their faces. It was hobo food cooked by men in white jackets, a meal invented inside a 400-hour month. Number 19, pinto beans with a smoked neck bone. Pinto beans were the cheapest dried bean in a black neighborhood grocery in 1934, running about 6 cents a pound. Porters' wives soaked them overnight, simmered them all day with a smoked pork neck bone, and ladled a thick portion into a small lidded crock that fit at the bottom of the tin pail. The neck bone gave up its meat slowly through the run, and by the second reheat, the broth had thickened into something close to gravy. Porters ate it cold or warm, depending on the stove access, scooping it with cornbread instead of a spoon. It was a meal designed by women who knew exactly how long a man would be away from a kitchen. Number 18, apple hand pies, sold to porters at division stops. Black women along the route ran small kitchens near the rail yards in towns like Greenwood and Vicksburg, and they sold apple hand pies wrapped in newsprint for a nickel apiece. The dough was rendered lard and flour. The filling was windfall apples cooked down with brown sugar. Porters bought them through the open Dutch door during the 5-minute stop, dropping the coin into a calloused hand and tucking the warm pie inside the tin pail beside the cold meal already there. Some women ran the same stand for 30 years and put their children through school on those nickels. The pie was eaten by lantern light an hour later, the crust shattering down the porter's lapel. A black economy ran alongside the Pullman line, and almost nobody outside it ever saw the books. Number 17, buttermilk, and a wedge of onion. Buttermilk was what a black household drank when fresh milk had soured past saving, and porters carried it in a small glass jar wedged in straw at the side of the pail. With it came a quartered raw onion in a separate twist of paper. The combination was country food brought north by men whose grandparents had farmed in Tennessee and Mississippi. A porter would drink the buttermilk straight from the jar, bite the onion, and call it a meal. It cost almost nothing, and it cut through the grease of every other thing in the pail. Older porters said it kept the stomach right on a long run. Younger porters learned to believe them by the second year. Number 16, stewed tomatoes. Over stale bread, tomatoes put up in glass jars during the late summer canning weekend fed black families through the lean months, and a porter's wife would send a small jar with him for the back end of the run. He poured the cold stewed tomatoes over slices of stale bakery bread saved from the week before, and the bread drank up everything the jar gave off. It was a meal his mother had made during the lean spring of 1919, and her mother had made it in the years right after emancipation. The tomatoes were sweet and slightly acid. The bread turned soft enough to eat with a spoon. Porters ate it sitting on the porter's bench, the tin pail open at their feet, the run behind them, and another one already on the schedule for Friday morning. Number 15, catfish fried the morning of the run. Catfish was cheap river food in the black neighborhoods of Memphis and Vicksburg, sold by weight off the back of a flat wagon for around 15 cents a pound in 1929. A porter's wife would dredge 2 small fillets in seasoned cornmeal at 5 in the morning, fry them quick in lard, and lay them on brown paper to cool while her husband shined his shoes at the kitchen table. The fillets went into the tin pail wrapped in wax paper, the cornmeal crust holding the heat for 2 hours and the flavor for 10. Porters ate them cold at the first long stop, peeling the paper back with 2 fingers. The fish never tasted as good as it had at dawn, but it tasted like home, and that was the only review that mattered on a 36-hour run. Number 14, molasses bread for the last leg. Molasses cost about 12 cents a quart at a corner grocery in 1930, and it was the cheapest sweetener a black household could keep on the shelf. Porters' wives baked a dense brown loaf on Saturday using flour, soda, a single egg, and a heavy pull of dark molasses, and they sliced it thick for the back end of the run. The slices traveled in a folded square of wax paper at the top of the tin pail where they would not crush under the heavier jars and tins. By the time the porter reached the last leg between Atlanta and Washington, the sweet bread was the only thing left in the pail. He ate it standing in the corridor, a slice in one hand, his cap tucked under the other arm. It was sugar enough to walk a man home. Number 13, cheap oxtail stew passed down to their sons. This is the cheap stew porters passed down to their sons. Oxtail was scrap meat in 1928, sold for almost nothing by black butchers in Chicago and St. Louis because white households would not touch it. Porters' wives simmered it for 6 hours with onion, garlic, and a single carrot until the bones gave up their marrow and the broth turned dark and thick. The stew went into a small enamel cup at the bottom of the pail, and the porter ate it cold on the second night, scraping the spoon along the rim. When his son turned old enough to take his own first run as a porter in the 1940s, the recipe rode with him. The pot moved one generation forward. The price stayed about the same. Number 12, greens cooked down with smoked turkey wings. Collard and mustard greens were the cheapest leaf a black grocer sold by the bundle in 1931, and porters' wives bought them in armfuls for under a dime. They cooked them down with smoked turkey wings instead of pork on the runs when a Muslim porter or a religious cousin needed to share the pail. The greens stewed for 3 hours until the leaves collapsed into a dark Potlikker broth and the turkey wing fell off the bone. A scoop of greens and a piece of the wing went into a lidded crock and sat at the side of the cornbread inside the tin pail. Porters ate the greens with a piece of cornbread broken into the broth, the cup balanced on a knee. It was field food turned working man food turned father and son food. Number 11, a single apple saved for sunset. An apple cost about 2 cents at a sidewalk fruit stand in 1932, and porters carried exactly one in the side pocket of the tin pail. It was not a snack and it was not breakfast. It was the thing a man ate when the sun went down on the second day of the run, and he needed to remember he was still a person and not a uniform. Older porters from Georgia taught the younger men this trick. Save the apple, eat it slow, eat it standing where you can see the country going by. A cousin of one porter said his uncle ate an apple at sunset every working day of 42 years on the rails. The apple was small. The ritual was not. Number 10, bacon fat drippings on toast. Bacon grease was free in any black household that fried pork on a Saturday morning, and porters' wives saved every spoonful in a tin can on the back of the icebox. The morning of a run, she would spread the cold drippings on 2 slices of yesterday's bread, brown the bread on the iron skillet, and salt it lightly. The toast cooled on the kitchen table and went into the pail wrapped in a clean dishcloth. Porters ate it standing in the porter's washroom at the end of the second shift, the bread soft from the heat of the pail, the salt cutting the fat just enough to keep a man eating. It cost the porter exactly nothing. It tasted, his wife said, like a Saturday morning that never had to end. Number 9, boiled peanuts in a twist of cheesecloth. Green peanuts sold for around 5 cents a quart at roadside stands in the rural South, and porters working the New Orleans line brought a sack home on the deadhead trip north. Their wives boiled them salty in a big kettle on Sunday afternoon and twisted a handful into a square of cheesecloth for the pail. Porters ate them slowly between division stops, cracking the shells with their thumbnails into a small folded paper for tidying after. The salt held the thirst down for hours, and the slow eating was the point. A run that lasted 36 hours needed food that lasted with it. The cheesecloth was rinsed and dried each Saturday, ready for the next trip, and the brine that soaked through it carried the faint smell of the kitchen home 3 states behind him. Number 8, a crock of souse meat. Souse was the cheapest cold cut a black grandmother in the South knew how to make, built from boiled pig's head and feet set into its own jelly broth with vinegar and pepper. It cost almost nothing because the butcher gave the head away for the asking. A small crock of sliced souse rode at the bottom of the pail on the longest summer runs, kept cool by the metal lining and the shaded baggage car. Porters ate it on crackers or directly off the spoon, the vinegar bite waking them up halfway between Birmingham and Washington. It was an old food his grandmother had taught his mother. The train just made it travel further. The recipe was never written down, only remembered in the proportions of the woman who taught it, and every porter who carried souse north was also carrying her hand in the work. Number 7, sweet tea in a mason jar. A pound of loose black tea cost about 30 cents in 1929, and it stretched across a family for a month. Porters' wives brewed it strong on the stove, sweetened it heavy with cane sugar, and chilled it overnight in a mason jar set against the icebox door. The jar rolled in the side pocket of the tin pail, wedged with newspaper to keep it from sweating onto the wax paper bundles. Porters drank it slow over the long southern stretch of the run, taking small sips through the afternoon. It was the closest thing a black man in a starched white jacket had to a glass of something cold on a hot July day. The sugar was the small luxury a porter allowed himself. Number 6, smothered chicken and rice. This became a Sunday plate in nearly every porter family from Chicago to New Orleans. A cheap stewing hen cost about 40 cents in 1930, and a pound of rice cost 6. The porter's wife browned the chicken Saturday night, smothered it in onion gravy with the cheapest yellow onion the grocer had, and ladled it over white rice in a small enamel cup that went into the pail for the Sunday run. Porters ate it cold off the spoon between Memphis and Cairo, or warmed it on the vestibule stove when the run allowed. The onion gravy held the rice together in a thick clump, and the meal traveled like it had been built for the tin pail from the start. Number 5, hominy and Potlikker. Dried hominy ran about 7 cents a pound in 1931, and the Potlikker that came off a pot of greens was free. A porter's wife would simmer the hominy in the leftover greens broth from Sunday's dinner, salt it lightly, and ladle it into a small lidded cup that fit beside the cornbread in the pail. The hominy soaked up the dark broth and turned into something between a soup and a porridge by the time the train reached its halfway point. Porters ate it warm if the stove was free and cold if it was not. It was poor food eaten without apology, the kind a porter's mother had cooked through the lean spring of 1918 and his grandmother had cooked through the lean spring of 1879. Number 4, cushaw squash, stewed with brown sugar. Cushaw was a long crookneck squash that black farmers in the Mississippi Delta grew in their kitchen gardens, and a single squash from the autumn harvest could feed a porter for a week of pale meals. A porter's wife would peel it Sunday morning, stew it slow with brown sugar and a little butter, and pack a thick portion into a small jar wedged at the bottom of the tin pail. The squash kept its sweetness for 3 days running, and porters ate it cold with the back of a spoon between the Carolinas and the Ohio River. It tasted like late September in a kitchen yard where children were shelling beans on the steps. The squash cost a black household exactly what the seed had cost a year before, and the seed had been saved from the squash before that. Some food did not really have a price. Number 3, crackling bread cut into squares. Cracklings were the crisp leavings from rendered pork fat, free at any black butcher who knew the porter's family, and his wife stirred a handful into Saturday's cornbread batter and baked it dense in cast iron. The bread cost almost nothing past the cornmeal, and the cracklings gave it the savor of a pork roast without the price. She cut the bread into small squares so 2 would fit beside the cornbread bricks in the tin pail. Porters ate them in the porter's washroom on the back end of the run, the squares cold and salty and dense enough to hold a man through the last 6 hours of the line. The cracklings themselves were a Saturday job. The lard rendered slow over a low coal fire while she watched her children play in the yard, the crisp bits saved in a jar for the rest of the week. Number 2, cabbage cooked down with ham hock scraps. A whole head of cabbage cost about 4 cents in 1930, and the scrap end of a ham hock cost about the same when a black butcher cut one for a regular customer. A porter's wife would chop the cabbage rough, simmer it for 2 hours with the hock scraps and a teaspoon of vinegar, and reduce the whole pot down to something dark and soft. She ladled a portion into a small lidded crock that wedged against the side of the pail. Porters ate it on the second night of a run with a piece of cornbread, the broth dark enough to stain the spoon. It was a meal his mother had cooked in a sharecropper's cabin in Alabama in 1908. The recipe never changed, only the kitchen did. Number 1, black coffee with condensed milk. A pound of cheap roasted coffee ran around 28 cents in 1929, and a can of sweetened condensed milk cost 10. Together, they were the first meal of every Pullman porter's working day and the last meal of his run home. His wife brewed the coffee strong on the kitchen stove at 4 in the morning, poured it into a small tin thermos, and stirred in a heavy spoonful of the thick yellow milk before sealing the lid. The thermos rode warm against the cold jars at the bottom of the pail. Porters drank it, standing in the vestibule before the first call to passengers, the steam fogging the high collar of the starched jacket, the sweetness cutting the bitter so a man could face 14 hours of yes sir and yes ma'am. It was the cheapest comfort a black household could send out the door, and it sat in the bottom of the pail until the very last sip.
Cabbage fermented into slaws was a clever way families made vegetables last long past their growing season. When fresh cabbage was cheap and abundant, families shredded it, salted it, packed it into jars or crocks, and let time transform it into something tangy and crisp that held up through bitter winters. This fermentation not only preserved the cabbage but added flavor and nutrients when meals were often plain and repetitive. During the Depression, when fresh greens disappeared quickly, having a jar of fermented slaw meant there was always something bright and sharp to cut through heavy dishes. It brought contrast to beans, cornbread, or stews, and made even the simplest supper feel complete. Kids might wrinkle their noses at the smell, but adults appreciated how far a single head of cabbage could be stretched. Cabbage slaw was survival with personality, tart, lively, and always ready to remind families that good food could still exist in hard times. Ash cake bread was born out of fire and hunger, a recipe that came alive in the heart of hard times. Cornmeal, salt, and water were all it needed. The dough was pressed together by hand and buried right into the hot ashes of a wood fireplace. It baked slowly, the outside hardening into a smoky crust, while the inside stayed soft, golden, and warm. When it came out, people brushed away the ashes, broke it open, and drizzled it with syrup or molasses. It had a taste that was both sweet and earthy, like the memory of home on a Sunday morning. Ash cake bread was a working person's meal, something you could make after a long day without needing an oven or a fancy pan. It was food that did not waste or wait, made for those who had nothing extra but still found comfort in what little they had. The smell of it filled small cabins and quiet kitchens, the sound of the crackling fire mixing with laughter or prayer. Every crumb reminded people that strength could grow even from ashes. Fried corn pone was a dish that required almost nothing but cornmeal, water, and lard, yet it managed to fill stomachs during times of want. It was denser than cornbread and more rustic, formed into small patties and fried in cast-iron skillets until golden. Families leaned on it for breakfast, lunch, or supper because it was inexpensive, used ingredients they almost always had, and could be made quickly. Corn was abundant across the South, and every pantry had a sack of cornmeal that could be stretched into meals again and again. Eating fried corn pone often meant there was no wheat bread to be had, but no one went hungry. It was eaten with beans, dipped in potlikker, or just on its own with a smear of molasses or syrup if available. Fried corn pone reflected the determination to create something warm and satisfying even when the cupboards were close to bare. Black walnut pound cake carried the wild woods straight into the holiday kitchen with a perfume unlike any other. Foragers collected the hard-shelled nuts each autumn, cracking them carefully to release the dark, robust kernels inside. The cake batter, rich with butter and eggs, absorbed the strong, earthy flavor of the walnuts, baking into a loaf dense enough to slice thin and savor slowly. Served at Christmas or family reunions, the cake announced both celebration and the success of gathering nature's bounty. Children helped shell the nuts, their hands stained brown from the husks, a seasonal badge of honor. Neighbors traded slices wrapped in wax paper as gifts, spreading cheer through the community. Today, imported walnuts and commercial cakes have replaced the ritual, but the memory of that deep, almost smoky taste lingers for those who once enjoyed a slice with coffee while snow fell outside and the house smelled of spice and toasting nuts. Brine-preserved greens were an ingenious way to hold on to summer's bounty long after the fields went bare. Collards, mustard greens, and turnip tops were packed into wooden barrels filled with salt water, weighed down with stones, and sealed tight. Over weeks, the leaves softened and fermented slightly, taking on a tangy flavor that woke up the dullest winter meal. They could be rinsed and cooked with lard, onions, or whatever scraps were available. This simple method kept vitamins alive in seasons when fresh food was impossible to find. The scent that rose when the barrels were opened was sharp, earthy, and comforting, a taste of summer revived in the dead of winter. In homes that had little, these barrels represented life insurance against hunger. Preparing them required patience and precision, the kind of quiet discipline that survival demanded. The barrels lined cabin corners like silent guards against hunger, waiting patiently until their contents were needed. In every household that relied on them, brined greens became a sign of foresight and care, another way the enslaved turned hardship into nourishment, proof that even time itself could be bent toward survival when guided by wisdom and will. Pone bread rose as the emergency staple when there was nothing in the house but cornmeal and water. Unlike cornbread that required eggs, milk, and baking powder, pone bread demanded only meal, salt, and liquid mixed into thick batter. The mixture was shaped by hand into flat cakes, then baked on hot griddles or directly in fireplace ashes until crusty outside and dense inside. This wasn't delicate food. It was survival bread that filled stomachs and provided energy when nothing else existed. In rural black households across the Deep South, mothers made pone bread multiple times daily, the smell of toasting cornmeal signaling that at least there would be something to eat. The bread kept well, lasting several days without going stale, which meant one batch could stretch across many meals. Workers carried pone bread to fields, eating it cold with whatever they could forage: wild onions, dandelion greens, or just salt. Children gnawed on pone bread while doing chores, the dense texture requiring real effort to eat but delivering lasting satisfaction through ancestral knowledge. Blackberry molasses cobbler was a sticky, smoky dessert that belonged to cast-iron skillets and long summer nights. The berries were gathered wild from fence lines and hedges, their juice staining fingers and laughter alike. Mixed with thick, dark molasses and a handful of sugar, they turned into a bubbling, fragrant filling. The crust was poured over top, sometimes biscuit dough, sometimes batter, and baked until the edges burned just enough to taste like smoke. It was messy and imperfect, but that was part of its beauty. The syrup thickened into a glossy black glaze that clung to every bite, sweet with a whisper of bitterness. People spooned it hot into bowls, sometimes with milk or cream, but it never needed help. Blackberry molasses cobbler tasted like work and reward, like something earned under the sun. It was the dessert that reminded families that sweetness could survive the hardest days, that joy could bubble up even from thorns.
Tell us in the comments which one of these meals you would carry in your own tin pail tomorrow if you had to ride a 36-hour run with $67 in your pocket. Tell us if your grandfather worked the rails, or your great uncle, or a cousin you only heard about in stories at the Sunday table. These were not cheap meals. They were the price of dignity, packed by women who knew exactly how long their men would be gone, eaten by men who knew exactly what they were paying for. The pail went out full on a Sunday morning and came back empty on a Tuesday night, and the whole country rode home on the labor of the men who carried it.